While recovering from trench fever in a cottage in Little Haywood, Staffordshire, in between bouts of debilitating infirmity and garrison duties, a reluctant lieutenant of the British Army began writing what, at the time, he conceived of as merely a mythical re-envisioning of English history. In this effort that he was never to conclude, he was informed by the philological instruction he'd received in a number of languages while pursuing a degree in English and Literature at Exeter College, Oxford. Yet out of this failed preliminary sketch of an elusive English mythology, he would come in time to develop a thoroughly realized secondary world and incorporate its wonders, if seldom ever beyond brief glimpses, into narratives that today are recorded among the most widely read works of literary fiction ever written. It is of little wonder that these stories have served as inspiration for countless others told in the tradition of epic fantasy over the many years since the lieutenant's writings, often striving for the depth of development that he has managed to achieve, if not always arriving at it. Our lover of fairy stories, born in imperial southern Africa, but remembering and loving most the West Midlands of his youth, would elaborate in better health his fictional reality in spurts and cycles over a long count of years. In time, his sub-creation matured into a history and dwelling fit to house those peoples, and their endeavors recount, whose speech and writing he'd devised to his satisfaction, deriving proficiency in the craft through the many linguistic essays that, on his own or with others, he'd attempted since childhood. Though he would lose both parents by age 12, his love for language that he received under the tutelage of his mother was never diminished. The particular predilection for inventing new languages he would come first to acquire with the assembling of Nebbosh in collaboration with his cousin Mary Ingleton, and would only grow with his own solitary efforts beginning with the Wherein, and proceeding on to a Guldogrin that would eventually evolve into languages put to print in his literary fiction. But for a long while, the demands of life and a post-war occupation as professor kept him from maintaining any regularity in these expeditions of creation, and far off yet was the ripening to a full realization of this world that was to come. Elsewhere, a long time ago, in a sense, in a galaxy far, far away from our present location, at least according to that frame of reference whose origin is coincident with the spatial mean of mass distributed amongst all the Generation 1 fermions, matter's not so dark, of the region of the universe as observable from the ocean surface at the 0 point on the Gulf of Guinea at any reconstructed moment in time from which all such material was collectively coplanar upon the hypersurface of the evolving present, not the present as measurable from any point set in time, and thus in an informatively decoupled arrangement, but existing at the same precise temporal displacement within the development of the universe as measured from the most recent causal convergence, the beginning. And with said origin, from before, evolving through time with this center of mass thus assessed, given that the trek traversed by our present community of stellar bodies and interstellar material, approaching its date with Andromeda, according to that reference frame has occurred within a filamentous relative concentration of such communities that locally constitutes the Virgo component of the Laniakea supercluster, which, under the influence of some great attractor, has been migrating shaplyward for some time. I mean, we're talking about this galaxy right here. Just at a point in its passes, it's been moving all the while according to any number of reference frames, inertial or not. And also we are talking less long ago and far away than for the previous story of the other guy, the late tenant. That guy, remember him? Anyways, displaced from here and now in time and space, but basically here as we normally perceive it, on this planet, but at a point in the past. A young lad, inhabiting another set of isles, a ways off the shores of what constitutes the same continuity of the Earth's crust and its biological integument that remain above the waves of the planet's ocean as the Lathian tenant's isles are least separated from, but just the other side of it basically, would walk through the caverns about the lands of his home in Sonobe, Kyoto Prefecture. In doing so, he would gain a deep appreciation for the wild and adventure. And if it was not the very thing that impelled him to explore, then from these travels he would acquire an intrepid playfulness with which he would routinely address himself to problems he encountered. This would prove invaluable, as a bold creativity and drive to pursue new possibilities only vaguely perceptible were needed to address the abundant supply of quandaries he was later to face. These qualities and others he would come to lean on in the shaping of a slew of titles falling in prodigious cascade down through the years, now spanning many franchises and further offshoots of diverse aspect. Among them, instances of unparalleled influence eliciting highest praise are counted, and kindled by the blaze ignited in their wake, innumerable flames have sprouted over the decades since the inception of those games, guided in their execution by our avid wanderer. As he grew older, the venturesome youth became interested in manga and fruitfully tried his hand at art and style. Added to this passion was a love of toys, and those of his design he would tinker with at length while pursuing an education at Kanazawa College of Art. Shortly after his commencement, through a connection of his father's, he interviewed with the president of an old playing card company, with 10 quantities of N in its due, or similar, perhaps it was 9 though, and soon by good fortune found himself under their employ as an apprentice. By this time, the organization's focus had broadened from merely assorted novelties and playing cards to toys and, importantly, to the emerging world of arcade games. Electronic games were still a young medium, and early attempts by the company to break into the industry were stretching its resources thin. Teetering on the precipice, the task now fell to our young apprentice to help devise an entirely new game to replace another that had not sold. The game became one whose minimal and somewhat derivative narrative was motivated by the woes of its central antagonist, a large ape whose love went unrequited for the one he held captive, who was the crux of the inciting love triangle. Its gameplay, however, centered on a little man who was an astounding leaper, who would traverse girders and ladders and dodge items tossed his way while scaling each level en route to the villainy transpiring at the top. The game was a swift success, and the world of looking at screens for hours upon end was forever changed. From that game, the apprentice would go on to make others in the same vein, eventually taking the lead on projects in which he was involved, and helping to set the course that would thenceforth dictate the Big End's development until today. That course would soon lead the organization to broaden its production scope to consoles, and for the first time our daring explorer would venture into digital realms in which the action did not deign to remain on a single screen set within a cabinet and enclosure, but through which whole worlds might be explored by scrolling the player's perspective along an expansive environment. Whole worlds accessed by cabinet or other domestic furnishings? Well, that's mere fantasy. But by a game cartridge inserted into a family computer? That's just fact, that is. The first game to explore this side-scrolling concept concerned once more the jumping fellow from the earlier title who had by now already appeared in a subsequent entry involving his likewise loftily leaping brother. His likeness and looks, longtime lieutenant later lifted the lustrous limelight, whose liminal label lamentably eludes recall, leaving like spectral liquid that leaks from trammeling vessel. Its sparkling spill falling full pull from the small candlelit kennel of my casual mole. Anyways, elaboration of this concept and method of play spawned numerous further titles advancing experiences in virtual realms, culminating, at least for the purpose of our consideration here, in the precipitation of one franchise that has put into the player's hands the very tools by which to build their own worlds within it. And is no wormhole or laser-enhanced lens by which to view the same place but in the future somehow around a space-time curve that is of the universe or whatever, but it is a very cool video game franchise in my IMO. And its name? Super Mario Maker. And yes, I am saying that Star Wars and the Paycheck films share the same continuity. Yeah. And also that the love triangle should have been between a lion, a witch, and a cabinet.
Here we go.
Oh yeah.
Luigi! I remembered the name. It was Luigi. Yeah. Anyway, just thought I'd let you know. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, whose well-known work The Lord of the Rings has distributed over 100 million copies, is a widely read author, yes, but perhaps more importantly to the topic at hand, as before noted, he was a philologist by training. While the boundaries defining philology have evolved over time, in Britain at the time that Tolkien was a student and later professor of it, philology constituted an academic discipline that attempted to trace the relationships between various languages through an analysis of the modification of their phonology and syntax from common ancestors. Unlike the associated practice of linguistics, which typically employs a synchronic analysis, or analysis of a language at a given point in its evolution, philology employs diachronic analysis, looking at language's development through time. A philologist often seeks to analyze texts surviving to the present and distill their literary tendencies in concert with efforts to reconstruct associated cultural histories that influenced and were influenced by such texts. All the while, these interpretations are informed by an inferred evolutionary tree of tongues, itself modified and updated as a consequence of developments in the textual analyses. It was upon the backdrop of such practices that Tolkien developed his mythical world and its languages and peoples, all interconnected and influenced by one another, and several elements of the many sources of his study and interest he would adapt to his own works as they grew. Shigeru Miyamoto, who may be best known for the Mario and Legend of Zelda series, is a video game developer whose games have sold more copies than any others. Of greater relevance, however, for our purposes, he is a person whose approach to making interactive entertainment involves him first and foremost engaging with the games he contributes to with the curiosity and interest of a player. In this way, he tries to establish a oneness, or kyokan, with those who will play the game, to exceptional results. Though not always lending itself to consistent release dates, very often this practice has led to higher quality games immensely enjoyable to play, not merely for their freedom and novel methods of control, but also for their colorful and diverse cast of characters. From gallant adventurers to minuscule garden denizens to magnificently mustachioed plumbers. And this joy that Miyamoto has in playing the games that he makes, which diffuses the final products, has only recently come to be at the fingertips of the player. For those of you who may not know, or are as yet unaware, or with which you may not have any familiarity, or concerning the existence of which are at this moment wholly possessed of utmost ignorance, if you have manifestly, incontrovertibly been residing within the profoundest depths of the most light-deprived crevice, of the undermost inaccessible facet, of an utterly lifeless and remote lithospheric fragment that is of astoundingly massive and impenetrable composure. But calm yourself, David. Nothing to get worked up about, old chap. Anyways, Mario Maker is a series of games that have attracted millions of users, who have altogether assembled an even greater quantity of courses across 5 game styles. Each now available in a score of themes, falling within several distinct genres, and incorporating in vast and varied assemblages over 100 unique objects, combining to produce bazillions of contraptions, enabling gorillions of unique interactions. Numbering 3 in total, though the third in order of release is numbered second, and the second released is subtitled 3, DS, stands for didn't sell. The games have sated somewhat that appetite for content from Miyamoto's beloved franchise that before had been allayed only by some ROM hacks and additional browser flash entries. Indeed, it was likely in large part the popularity and increasing quality and supply of efforts by the ROM hacking community that motivated Nintendo's decision to pursue such a series at all. And it all started with a kid with a passion for manga art and an adventurous spirit. And from numerous tabletop role-playing games to fantastical worlds explored in television, film, and literature, inspiration aplenty has been drawn from what began as the forays of a child fascinated with language. Tolkien's particular notions about his own role in the process of the development of art, as with most people concerning most anything they have ideas about, derive from his understanding of the contextualizing formulations to which he was predominantly exposed. If that makes sense. You got that. Intertwined with the philological construction of a deep interrelation of environment, people, and language that conferred on his constructed world an indelible authenticity, Tolkien also constructed a cosmology that was heavily influenced by his theological contentions, which seem to have not settled entirely during his life. Though beginning life as the child of a Baptist mother caring for 2 young boys after the untimely death of their father, at age 8 his mother would convert to Catholicism, and it was thus largely within a Catholic setting that his notions governing his fictional world would arise. Though many of his views would be his own, and sometimes set against the precepts of his church, nevertheless, central to his way of relating to his own activities of mythopoeic construction was to regard this secondary world of his imagining as subcreation. Theologically, subcreational status sets all works devised by persons subject to a deified authority, and the acts that bring them about, as subsidiary and or tributary to the act of creation of the physically inhabited cosmos that is ascribed to a deity often conflated with the authority. Had any of you been mistakenly under the impression, it's clearly quite far from the process of the construction of undersea vessels, though such would constitute a variety of subcreation. For Tolkien, subcreation framed the fictional realm of his legendarium as a further expression of the world and the will of the god of his faith, and also applied to all the actions of all the peoples inhabiting the reality of the relatively primary creation of Ea within the secondary world conjured through his Middle-earth writings. Thus the works of the Eruhini and Khazad and Ainur, and other peoples of Arda, were subsumed within the will and creation of Ilúvatar. Also, the works that Tolkien wrote retelling their stories he did not claim as wholly his own, but considered to be creative acts derivative of the primary creation by which he understood himself to exist, believing that through these writings he might understand his creator better. Now, I do recognize that there are many ways in which to understand subcreation. The relation of the subcreator, little maker as Tolkien referred to himself, to the presumptive creator deity, and many ways to conceptualize such metaphysics as are propounded by those who have interpreted the doctrines of various faiths. For Tolkien, his personal faith would have been influenced by the relevant canonical texts, interpreted along the lines of various tendencies in the forms they developed into by the early 20th century in the place that he lived, and modified by contentions he would come to acquire. His own ideas about subcreation and his perceived relation to his creator were also not a singular, unchanging thing. Nor by extension was Tolkien himself one boxable, packageable entity. The person of Tolkien, whether understood to be his physical form, the actions taken thereby, the sum of the beliefs that he held, or anything else, was many things in many places over a duration of time, despite what our desires for simplicity might move us to contend. A person's essence cannot be distilled by any calculus, however meticulously and dispassionately carried out,
that we here possess,
or at least of which I am at all aware. And I am not here to quash or exclude any alternative interpretations in this area. But in order to proceed, it becomes necessary to compress and simplify this complex and evolving notion in Tolkien's view. And I do apologize if this is not to someone or another's preference, however this ultimately cannot be helped. And now, proceed I will. In the context of Mario Maker, possible manifestations of subcreation, I will restrict to those activities that bring forth the potential conditions for new experiences to be had within the environments that the games generate. So this would include level creation certainly, but also comments and drawings left within the confines of these levels. Wowee, mister! I wonder who left that comment. Gee whiz, sure is nifty. The act of playing the levels would therefore not constitute subcreation, whether played in single player, co-op, or versus, in levels encountered in 100-man, endless mode, favorites, or courses, singly or otherwise. Though certainly collaboration and co-op can possess some very creative aspects, it does not develop the conditions of game environments by which new experiences can be had. Screenshots and similar means of interacting with levels I do not consider to fall within the umbrella of creation, but interaction, which in other senses constitutes a form of creation that we will not discuss here. Certainly had we taken the Kyokan route, rather than the subcreation one where we are to concern ourselves with an individual person's status as subject to an authority, of whom they are a little replica and after whom they are to pattern their existence, not a component of a whole comprised of equals. We would be talking about interaction as a method of establishing oneness and its creative potential. But we didn't choose to tackle Kyokan or some other philosophy, so... Curation of levels into superworlds is a creative act? I guess we've used a bit of similar sounding jargon here, so I think I should try to clarify some things. Superworlds are a way of assembling multiple courses into game-like experiences in Mario Maker 2, and are not like the opposite of a subworld with respect to the main world of a course, or anything like that. Subworld is likewise not to be taken as an alternative reference to subcreation, which we have previously defined, but are just the secondary areas accessed by warp pipe, transporting you to them from the area in which play begins within a given course. Also, these worlds of Mario kind are not at all associated with the aforementioned secondary or primary worlds, which I should probably explain now. Secondary worlds are, according to Tolkien, the constructed subcreations of persons possessed of world-like qualities, having been produced to resemble our world in certain respects, and the primary world is the actual realm of existence in which persons reside. Occurrences taking place in secondary worlds are commonly said to be in-universe, and activities in the primary world are commonly said to be IRL. Though that gets a little complicated when we're talking about things happening on the internet. Regardless, you guys understand. You're following. Right? So, to what extent can Mario Maker be observed to reflect Tolkien's notion of subcreation? Well, a rather significant indication that it sufficiently satisfies the conditions for a subcreative act lie in the name of a particular genre of levels relatively well represented within Mario Maker's vast library. The term derives in this particular usage from association with a certain ROM hack, one of the first cruel and punishing hacks that a number of people found enjoyable, somehow, noted for a heavy reliance on invisible blocks. Levels in which completion is effectuated by remaining airborne for extended periods without landing often carry this label. Although item abuse would usually be a somewhat more accurate term, it is nevertheless still common to refer to levels in which completion requires the player to take advantage of various peculiarities of the game's physics as kaizo. Kaizo is a Japanese word which translates roughly to restructure, reorganize, or rearrange, and is used to describe ROM hacking as a whole, but came into this specific understanding as a consequence of the techniques employed in the previously alluded to hack, Kaizo Mario World. Fujisaku no Kaizo Mario, Super Mario World, o Yuji ni play saseru. I think I got that right. Or, making my friend play through my Mario hack, Super Mario World. This is significant as one of the ways in which Tolkien distinguished subcreation from creation proper regarded the change, or its lack, in the status of substances, or their lack, involved in the act of creation through what we may presume to be a causal medium such as time. Though he may have never used the exact words, it seems that Tolkien contended that subcreation is inherently a synthesis or assembling of materials, ingredients, or notions already in existence, where the reagents and products of the creation are both classes of substances possessed at all stages with the quality of being, while primary creation is a form of reality generation ex nihilo, or from nothing. Now, I don't think that Tolkien would have meant by the preposition ex, or from, had he used the phrase, that the material of the universe is derived from the void or nothingness. Had he done, he might have been onto something physically. But from, I think, here is best understood to mean succeeding or following, subsequent to and coming temporally after a nothing that is its absence. As a rearranging in new and interesting ways of items assembled in a game's engine created by others, yet being progenitorial of novelty, implying a creative act, Kaizo would seem to constitute subcreation in Tolkien's paradigm, and thus not be primarily creative. Further, Kaizo or rearrangement is, I think, an accurate portrayal of what is actually being done when people create within Mario Maker. This is not to imply that the development of the games themselves was achieved out of nothing, or came subsequent to a nothing, and constitutes an instance of primary creation here. However, this indicates that making of Mario satisfies at least one major condition of subcreation within the confines of the further subcreation of the game itself that allows for it. So we needn't squint too hard nor trouble our thought too much to reason that such Mario making does constitute a form of subcreation as old JRR would have conceived of it. Clearly, a theological framework such as Tolkien's is not the only one we might apply to such matters, whether matters of making courses or of writing works of high fantasy. And for symmetry's sake, it would be nice to be able to apply the Kyokan of Miyamoto's philosophy to the works of Tolkien, and to determine whether through the creation of his world and the translating of it to the novel form, he became more one with those who would read it. Certainly he responded to numerous letters over the years, but within the works themselves and his methods of bringing them about, though novels are not an interactive medium, was Tolkien making his conceptions more or less accessible? Was he eliminating barriers or erecting them between readers' understanding and his thinking? Do the appendices of The Lord of the Rings and other supplementary material that help to illuminate the more abstruse or thinly elaborated contents of his world also bring readers closer to his process and help them to feel about the work as he felt himself? In what ways can we distinguish impersonal Kyokan from the hyperpersonal, at least along one orientation, parasocial relationship? What distinctions might we draw between getting to know and feeling close to and becoming one with in various contexts? These and many other questions might be posed, but this is like Babby's first YouTube video. I have no idea how long this behemoth is ultimately going to be when edited together as it stands, because I've never done this before. So yeah, all that will have to be left for another day. Anyways, continuing now with the topic at hand. If indeed the making of Mario does constitute a form of subcreation, it begs the question, might we employ to similar effect Tolkien's methods in Mario Maker? How much of his process of mythopoeia, myth-making, or of writing narrative fiction translates to a course's design? It was Tolkien's belief that he as author of something that was to be more than a mere bedtime story for his children, and intended for a broad audience, should take his creation seriously as an entity in its own right, and imbue it with depth beyond that absolutely necessary to relate the narrative in a believable way. Regarding his more notable works, he felt they should have an internally developed interrelation of elements resembling what we might observe in our own world. From lands that were molded as a consequence of causal processes, to peoples with complex yet coherent histories whose memory of which may not have always been the most accurate, to languages for those people to speak, and explanations for similarities, differences, and origins of these tongues. This interdependency of elements can be observed most clearly in Tolkien's works in the sundering of his elves. No, not tsundere, my dear weeaboos, nor thundering, as my most excellent spell check appears to think that I meant to say. Or maybe I did write that. We'll never truly know. This sundering of the elves refers to those events that led to the Quendi, as the elves of Tolkien's Middle-earth refer to themselves, to diverge geographically as well as culturally and linguistically. Often it would be features of the land, some of which were erected by the tale's primary antagonist Melkor expressly for this purpose, that would dismay and hinder some and yet not others during the Great Migration towards the realm of the Valar, thus separating the kindreds of the Eldar, or those elves who forsook Cuiviénen and sought the Undying Lands. All of which I'm sure made sense to you. You guys know. You're on top of it, right? Right, guys? These sunderings mirrored in the secondary world of his subcreation the primary world methods by which Tolkien developed his constructed languages, and entire histories were often devised in order to explain the ways in which languages he devised had diverged. But how can we as sub-creators reflect these practices in the levels and worlds that we create in Mario Maker? Though we can arrange things as we wish to, which one might argue constitutes a kind of geography we can construct, and less ambiguously so when we design the overworld maps of a superworld than when we develop our courses proper. Certainly we can't develop something approaching a history or language, lending a credibility or depth to our creations. Putting aside the question of history, in fact, I perceive that there is an analog to language that exists already within levels in Mario Maker. And how coherent and comprehensible that language is can profoundly impact the enjoyment that a player derives when engaging with a course. As the verbal form of language with which we are all familiar provides us with a means by which to express meaning, intent, or desire, possessed with the capacity to convey notions, images, and feelings, therefore any construct proposed to constitute a language should possess at least some of these qualities. Though only somewhat abstractly, expressions of language and levels might arise in the adornments they possess, which can elicit particular feelings and emotions in their players, responses to the aesthetics of design. A far more concrete expression of language in the levels that we make, however, are the visual indicators and sounds that we leave to supply the player with visual instruction of what to do to proceed, or audible alert of something subtle yet significant. Indicators are an aspect of the language of a course that relay intent from the creator, and if done effectively, are comprehensible to the player, facilitating their passage through the course and likely also improving their enjoyment of it. I just ended a sentence with the preposition. I hope you're okay with that. Few, if any, of us much enjoy encountering frustratingly abstruse obstructions that absolutely must be overcome in order to proceed. A notable exception is when we as the player desire to take measure of our mastery of the game and its components, and the intent of a course we encounter is specifically to test knowledge and awareness of the behavior of any number of mechanisms. These are, of course, puzzle levels. Puzzle levels often require attention paid to the qualities that emerge from the combined functions of different objects, compelling the player to logically work out the interactions that must occur and to accurately predict the consequences of certain actions to be taken based on their familiarity with the properties of items as well as the game's inherent mechanics. Only through correct anticipation of effects may progress be achieved and the player fulfill all of a puzzle level's requirements without prior knowledge of how any of it is specifically to be done. Assuming that there's no cheese, of course. Just as language describing the completion of a level may be intentionally withheld or concealed by the creator for the purpose of facilitating its particular variety of challenge, so too can language be present and yet submerged under the surface of a literary text in order to perform its intended function. In literature, this manifests not only interpretively through theme and subtext, but also directly, like in the withholding of the full expression of key details briefly alluded to in Mysteries, and also in one of Tolkien's favorite literary devices, foreshadowing. Language that conceals can still inform. Indications that fall short of full expression can still supply faint glimmers of suggestion, on initial and ever more so subsequent readings or playthroughs, and obfuscation is not absence. Even the most treacherous little puzzle that has nevertheless been made well can encode through the language of its construction messages directed towards its solution. We won't linger on troll levels, for they speak a language of misdirection, though a familiarity even with that community's own developed lexicon can confer on the player an anticipatory wisdom. Auto levels are wonders to be enjoyed and beheld like breathtaking rides or thrilling films. Their language is in their motion and disorientation, engendering surprise and astonishment at what happens next, and players may marvel at their make and the beauty in their cheating of many certain deaths. Mystery levels dark and menacing may converse with the player only in brief flashes, to frighten and overwhelm the odd, but to reward the perceptive. But my heart goes out most to those levels that demand of the player an adventurous spirit. Levels of great extent, and often, when done well, of many uncertain yet optional paths, all of which may be explored only through subsequent expeditions. And some of those options may be kept mysterious. When interaction with any level component is not necessary for completion, I feel it may be left unexplained, the method of satisfying its requirements left without indication. Like a bit of Elvish reproduced untranslated or even transliterated that might augment the reader's experience in some way if understood, but is otherwise incidental to the development of the plot. A tangential curiosity peripheral to the experience of a course may fuel interest and even new creative impulses in players so inclined, but would not hinder those who are not. According to Tolkien, part of the attraction of The Lord of the Rings is, I think, glimpses of a large history in the background. An attraction like that of viewing far off an unvisited island, or seeing the towers of a distant city gleaming in a sunlit mist. Items presented in a narrative need not prove important whatsoever to a plot's advancement or sensicality in order to elicit joy in the reader. Plot is what motivates the book to be written and read, but not what distinguishes the memorable from the ordinary. Similarly, it is the accents to levels that makes them memorable, not the actions the player character must take in order to reach their end. Though for such required actions that are particularly technical or challenging, and whose necessity might be imperfectly clear, indicators really ought to be employed. Perhaps it is to be expected given how much attention and praise is directed by the community towards technically challenging courses, but something of a consistent dialect or orthography has arisen around indicators for particular tricks and where they are to be performed. Almost always these indicators are associated with a particular implementation of an item, and they serve to reduce the amount of time a player already familiar with relevant mechanics must take in order to master courses lacking clear videos. This consistent relation of intention strikes me as a form of group-constructed language, like Esperanto, taking from different indicators employed in disparate courses and consolidating them as Esperanto did morphemes from largely Indo-European languages. Once again, I'm certain you understood what all of that meant. Naturally, people are free to develop their own approach to semiotically convey the actions demanded of a player in a level, after the fashion of Tolkien, who would develop his own private languages. However, it does make interpretation by others somewhat difficult, who must decode the structures based on inference and any analogy to other methods. Where a firm understanding of intent is invaluable, and replication from a demonstration is not possible, use of the standard kinds of indicators that exist would likely serve the player best. A standardized lexicon is, however, never a completed task, as new complex mechanics and mechanisms are continually being discovered and developed. And relating their function or proposed method of interaction will undoubtedly require new symbols be created to accompany them. So we have established that courses in Mario Maker, even those bereft of comment, description, or scrutable title, can within their playable space alone communicate effective stories through elements constituting intelligible language native to them, satisfying that condition Tolkien considered indispensable to his own literary subcreations. And through this language, a level may provision or withhold supplies essential to their completion in ways kind or cruel, certainly. Yet there is another variety of inconvenient obfuscation that derives from negligence. For while storytelling is as old as our species, it is nevertheless no trivial matter to conduct a plot from a beginning to an end in a way that people in one context or another would find satisfying. Neither is it a simple and straightforward undertaking to build a purposeful course that most any potential unknown player can find coherent and enjoyable. And seldom is this actually accomplished. One notable issue for any prospective maker is the unclear task of anticipating how a player without any knowledge of one's level more demanding than the untroubled passage in the unambiguous direction of the goal, which knowledge the creator is obviously possessed of, might in their relative ignorance engage with the level's challenges. And young minds will perhaps have the greatest difficulty imagining another's perspective, which effectively addressing this complication of asymmetric awareness necessitates. But should those who currently lack any discernible direction or intelligibility in conveying their ideas through a level's design, who fail to account for the ignorance of the player in comparison to themselves, should they not create? Little Tippies be gone! No. I do not think that Tolkien considered it merely the province of accomplished peoples to take part in the crafting of art. And were he to contend this, I would be compelled to disagree, in light of the constraints of our existence, the manner in which anyone obtains proficiency in anything. We all must begin somewhere, and not all of us begin whenever we are assessing that to have happened, at places equally exceptional according to the perception of others, and ever have room to grow. Prior to being knowledgeable or capable of a thing, we are ignorant and incapable as a matter of our very process of development and the social means by which we acquire new understanding. We cannot download all at once into our conscious minds concepts or skills as depicted in the Matrix, for example. We possess structures up here that developed over time and apparently require iterative approaches to understanding and cognitive growth, and respond best to experiencing things in escalating presentation of complexity. Consequently, one need not be able to perform a spring drop, ground pound, cancel, shell jump midair all at once, but can acquire the ability to after learning each individual component by watching others and striving to imitate. And there are just so many tricks that one can perform in these incredible games. Item abuse alone's got you covered. We got bomb slides, Yoshi exchanges, reclaims, you got all your midair jumps, your shell, double shell toss, pow, P-switch, spring, and wake-ups. And don't forget the lots of drops. Spin drop, shell drops, your good old spring drop with the cherry on top. And we might have mixed up some of the nomenclature drop. Hey, I'm trying over here. And the cast is vast indeed. Look at all the wacky goons. What is this guy doing? Oh my god, what is it? Okay. Yeah. Games even got Balrogs, okay? Well, near enough. And if you were wondering, yes, Bowser does show his cloaca. Not for the faint of heart. There may even be some things in there that get your level removed. Some rules may be bent. Others may be broken. Which is not always a bad thing. Set that bedraggled countenance right over here, Gandalf. You and I are gonna have some words. Whether it's the Bowserly Balrogs, or diabolical dragons, or the aerial acrobatics or puzzling contraptions, or the mystery or adventure. There's probably something that you can imagine taking place in or inhabiting this world that is worthy of your powers of creation. Are any of our powers so great that we may adroitly apply all the elements of Tolkienian subcreations seamlessly into our courses? Perhaps not. But we can approach them nevertheless as things worthy of our more assiduous faculties. to be respected as creations unto themselves, and not mere number-go-up feedback generators to enrapture us in directionless diversion. To those of you who have the good fortune of being able to experience the Mario Maker games, and who have the time and desire for such experience, what are you still doing here? To the rest, I hope that you are someday able to. Do you linger in the hopes that one little morsel more I shall part with to tide you over just a single moment longer? Do your best Tolkien impressions, you little makers, you. Get out there. Get making, or have yourself a good old time playing, regardless of your age or skill level, regardless of how confident you are in your own abilities. Even those littlest by stature, or least according to whatever perception or metric, may still trouble the counsels of those who themselves account great. I should warn, however, at least it may avail you to be aware, that with the promulgation of a competitive mode of engagement as the principal guiding rubric through which to conduct our intercourse, disastrously coloring our regard for one another, that some more thoroughly transfixed by its prevalence can be pretty hard in their treatment, either aware of the aim or as unwitting couriers of designs to discourage. Do not be so if you can, either discouraged or discourager. Now, essay forth to what awaits. Perhaps it will be you who discovers a way in which to incorporate a deep lore of history or language into the secondary worlds of your levels, through narrative, through the depositing of clues only later revealed in their importance, or something else entirely. Whatever our course, though none of us prove possessed of quite the aptitude, yet, of a Tolkien or Miyamoto, I hope we may provide or experience, if only ever in brief glimpses, an attraction like that of viewing far off an unvisited island, or seeing the towers of a distant city gleaming in a sunlit mist. And may we do so together in a splendid array of forms, in astonishing ways unlooked for. Until our next encounter.
Tune in next week and I'll tell you what that means. See you then.